Hey guys, welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be my cyclic vomiting diagnosis story. So let's just jump right in. If you were new here, I was diagnosed with cyclic vomiting syndrome in April. But I have dealt with the issue since 2022. If you are new here, I have multiple chronic illnesses, most of which one of the symptoms is nausea or vomiting. So in April of 2022, when I randomly threw up one night after eating, it wasn't that big of a deal. But as the week went on and it didn't get better, we started noticing that something was probably going on. Then out of nowhere, it just went away. That was basically how it started. Randomly one day I threw up. I dealt with that for about a week, 2 weeks, and it would go away. How long it stayed away was really dependent on, basically, we never really figured out what triggered it. Sometimes it was food, sometimes it was the weather. If it's extremely hot out, my body doesn't do well and I get extremely nauseous. And other times it just happens out of nowhere. So the first time it happened was in April of 2022, 3 months after I got my diagnosis of postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So the first time it happened, it was like, pause can cause nausea, okay, no big deal. So, and I was already on Zofran at the time. So my doctor said, because I just called him and told it, or I messaged him. Yeah, I sent him a message and said, okay, this is what's going on. And he said, just take your Zofran, deal with it. If it gets worse, come see me. And like a few days before I was going to make the appointment, because it hadn't gone away, the next morning I wake up perfectly fine. No nausea, no vomiting, nothing. And it stayed that way for a couple of months. And then randomly it hit me again. I started throwing up and I could not stop, and it lasted 2 or 3 weeks. And I dealt with that pattern for about a year. And then in 2023, we dealt with that same pattern for like 2 or 3 months, and then out of nowhere I was fine again. Then in November of last year it hit me again, and it lasted. This was November of last year to December was the longest time. I was in like a 6-week cyclic vomiting syndrome flare. I saw the doctor about it twice. The first time was a video call. He said, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how you're going to treat it. And then if you're not feeling better, come see me. About 2 weeks later, I was in the doctor's office because it was nothing was helping, nothing was working. I did a full video on that flare. I will link it in the cards. But then out of nowhere, once again, it just randomly got better and went away. But finally, in April of this year, I went to the doctor. We had talked about cyclic vomiting syndrome before and it being a possibility, but we had never really, because you can't test for it. There's no real test for it. It's basically you test for a number of conditions, and if all of those come back negative, then cyclic vomiting syndrome is your answer. So after basically being tested for a whole bunch of stuff and it not being it, my doctor finally said, okay, so we're going to say you have cyclic vomiting syndrome. And honestly, it's not really much of a diagnosis story. It's basically, I started throwing up randomly. It lasted 2 weeks. I was better for a few months, and then it happened again, and then it happened again, and that's basically it. And then I was tested for numerous other things. The first few times I saw the doctor, and I saw the doctor maybe 10 or 15 times in between all of these spells and during these spells and all that, and was told I had everywhere from gastritis or enteritis to a stomach virus. And it was as simple as that. Down all the way down to you have POTS, this can cause nausea and vomiting, so it's a POTS flare. So yeah. And the funny thing about it is I do have chronic gastritis. It's just kind of, it's always there, but it doesn't always cause nausea and vomiting, and when it does, it doesn't cause it for 2 or 3 weeks at a time with no help, or with nothing helping it. So yeah, basically cyclic vomiting syndrome was, okay, you have this, and this already, but you're having this problem and it's not being caused by any of your other problems, so that's how we're going to end you up and tell you you have cyclic vomiting syndrome. Like I said before, there is no test for it. It's more or less just ruling everything else out and saying this is what you have. So that might be the simplest diagnosis story I've ever done, but that is my cyclic vomiting syndrome diagnosis story. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you've not done so already, hit the red subscribe button down below. I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.